When Palpatine finally ended his Sith Master, he did far more than commit a single act of betrayal. On that night in 32 BBY, the future Emperor overthrew 1,000 years of Sith beliefs while using the methods he would later use against the Jedi, and completing a ritual change that would reshape the galaxy forever. Drawing from both Canon and Legends sources, 6 critical actions took place when Darth Sidious turned against Darth Plagueis, and each one reveals something important about the man who would become Emperor. First, he lured his master into a false celebration and slowly weakened his defenses throughout the evening. The timing of this action was no accident and carried deep meaning for the Sith tradition that stretched back 1,000 years. James Luceno's novel, Darth Plagueis, reveals that the attack took place on the night before Palpatine was elected Supreme Chancellor of the Galactic Republic. This was 32 BBY, and the political crisis on Naboo had been created specifically to push the Senator into the highest political office in the galaxy. The Sith had started a war and tragedy across the entire planet to create this moment, and now 2 rises to power would occur within hours of each other. One would be public and celebrated across the Republic, while the other remained hidden in darkness. Yet the setting itself created a dark meaning for what was about to unfold. Plagueis had chosen his fancy penthouse apartment in the Kaldani Spires residential apartment building on Coruscant for their celebration of the coming victory. The building towered above the surrounding cityscape, and the penthouse offered views of the Senate district where Palpatine would be crowned Chancellor by morning. The dwelling belonged to Higo Damask, which was the public entity Plagueis had built as a moon banker and financial power broker over many decades of careful work. This penthouse stood for everything the Sith Lord had built through patient scheming, including his wealth and political network, and a carefully built empire of influence. The relationships with senators and corporate leaders, and the invisible threads connecting the banking clan to 1,000 other groups would all belong to someone else before morning. Sidious gave Plagueis Celestin wine throughout the evening, and as the night wore on, the Sith Master became more and more drunk, and his defenses began to weaken. Meanwhile, the apprentice practiced the words of his public victory while planning his private one. Sidious practiced his acceptance speech for the chancellorship many times, while Plagueis listened and offered his thoughts on how to address the Senate. He refined the phrases and adjusted the tone because he wanted every word perfect for the moment when the Senate would recognize him as its leader. All the while, he was planning the private victory that would come first. The guard of Plagueis lowered, and his awareness dulled because he trusted his apprentice completely after decades of working together toward this moment. They had schemed side by side against the Jedi, the Republic, and the galaxy itself, and the Moon believed they shared a bond that went beyond the traditional Sith relationship of suspicion and certain betrayal. This trust would prove to be his deadly mistake, because the dark side had already chosen his replacement. Eventually, Plagueis fell asleep, and the dark side of the Force called to the Senator of Naboo to take his place as the ruling Sith Lord. Second, he attacked with deadly accuracy the moment his master fell asleep. Sidious targeted the specific weakness that would make fighting back impossible. The moment had arrived after years of patient waiting and careful planning. He struck with powerful force lightning that destroyed the breathing device Plagueis had been forced to wear since surviving a Maladian attempt on his life in 52 BBY. Without the breathing device working properly, the Moon began to suffocate while his apprentice watched, and what followed was darkly ironic in ways that would echo through Sith history for generations to come. The Sith Lord, who had given his existence to beating the end of life, who had spent decades studying midichlorian control and the secrets of living forever, now choked on his last breaths while his apprentice watched. Palpatine struck him with force lightning and choked every last bit of air out of his master. He continued his attack until he was certain Plagueis had passed, because there would be no recovery, no trick, and no survival this time. The method itself was important and revealed much about the future Emperor's character and his approach to removing obstacles. There was no warning, no trial, and no fight between equals. The attack came while Plagueis slept, striking him when he was most open and showing how Sidious would later ambush the Jedi. Even in victory, Sidious hesitated and feared his mentor might have outsmarted him because of his knowledge of life and what came after. The answer involves a cruel irony that speaks to the nature of the dark side itself. The Legends novel shows that the Force had basically abandoned Plagueis due to his experiments with the midichlorians and his desire to bend the will of the Force by making life last longer. His scientific approach to the dark side had created a distance between himself and the very power he sought to master through research. Plagueis also suffered from physical limits that came with his injuries. The Maladian attackers, who had come after him 20 years earlier, had left him needing the breathing device that Sidious destroyed with his opening strike. Even if Plagueis had woken in time, his body was weakened in ways that would have made fighting back difficult against a prepared and ruthless attacker. Third, he delivered a crushing speech that revealed his true feelings about their entire relationship. As the moon lay struggling for breath, Sidious spoke words that exposed decades of hidden anger and planned manipulation. He called his master a useless old fool and recounted their entire history together with brutal honesty. It was Higo Damask as Darth Plagueis who came to Naboo to exploit the planet's plasma and set the Trade Federation up as its overseers. It was Plagueis who set his sights on a seemingly confused young man and, with careful skill, pushed him into ending his father, mother, and siblings. The apprentice continued his verbal attack without mercy because it was Plagueis who took him as an apprentice, sharing some knowledge but keeping the most powerful secrets and denying him his wishes as a way to control him while filling him with deadly rage and turning him to the dark side. It was the master who criticized the early efforts of his apprentice and who once choked him to show who was stronger. Whether these accusations were entirely true or merely excuses, they revealed how Sidious saw every part of their relationship as control that he now returned in kind. Yet even in this moment of betrayal, Sidious recognized his master's role in his rise. Even all that the moon had taught him might not have been enough to take the final steps to the chancellorship without help in controlling the Senate and bringing into play various allies across the galaxy. Plagueis had used his identity as Higo Damask to open doors that the senator from Naboo could never have opened alone. The banking clan, the Trade Federation, and corporate leaders across dozens of systems all came from connections the master had grown over decades. Sidious admitted he could not have succeeded without his master, and this admission revealed the truth about their entire relationship. Sidious had taken knowledge, resources, and political power first, and drained everything useful from his master before throwing him away. The partnership had always been temporary from one side at least, because Plagueis saw a partner, while Sidious saw a stepping stone to greater power. Sidious saw the openness of Plagueis as a weakness and used it throughout their entire relationship. In his speech, he accused the moon of sharing some knowledge, but keeping the most powerful secrets, and claimed his master had denied him his wishes as a way to control him. Fourth, he openly rejected the vision of Plagueis for shared rule and restored the traditional Sith path. This action was not simply about power, because it was about beliefs and the future of the Sith Order itself. Plagueis had spent decades trying to reshape what it meant to be Sith, and Sidious rejected every part of that vision in a single night of violence. The Secrets of the Sith explains that Plagueis taught his apprentice that 2 Sith were required for their dangerous schemes. If they worked together following the Rule of Two by Darth Bane, they would succeed in controlling the full power of the dark side and rule forever for 10,000 years. The Darth Plagueis novel describes how the moon promised to break the cycle of betrayal entirely and create something new in Sith history. Although the training would be hard, the master assured his apprentice that they would be free of the Rule of Two and its requirement that one must fall for the other to rise. They would neither keep any secrets from each other, nor feel any jealousy or distrust in their relationship. They would serve the dark side together as equals in power and purpose, and partnership would replace fear in this new vision of what the Sith could become. However, Plagueis went even further by attempting something rarely achieved in Force history. Inspired by the doctrine of the dyad, he tried to create a powerful bond with Sidious that would have been a unique Force bond as strong as life itself. Such a connection would make betrayal impossible because their fates would be linked together forever. However, Plagueis was unable to form the dyad despite his great power, and his failure convinced Sidious that his master was not worthy of the task. The difference between master and apprentice was basic and impossible to bridge from the very beginning. Plagueis wanted to live forever because he believed the secret lay in science and wanted to escape the rule of two through eternal life. If both Sith Lords lived forever, neither needed to pass for the other to advance. Sidious chose a different path entirely because he embraced replacement, and he betrayed and destroyed his Sith Master to train his own Sith apprentice, Darth Maul, because the rule of two limited their ranks to 2 Sith Lords at any given time. In his speech, Sidious openly rejected the shared rule model with words that revealed his true nature, declaring that now that they had won the race, he did not need a partner, because the presence of his master and unnecessary advice would only confuse matters. The words were meant to hurt, because the apprentice was not just ending his master, but rejecting the entire way of thinking. He had never planned to share power, and had only pretended to accept the vision while planning to restore the traditional Sith path. One Sith believed the future meant ending the cycle of betrayal forever, while the other believed the cycle was the point. Plagueis wanted change, but Sidious wanted tradition, and tradition won that night in the penthouse above Coruscant. Fifth, he completed the ritual change as the dark side proclaimed his reign through a tremor that shook Coruscant. The doubt Sidious experienced passed quickly, and in its place came a dramatic shift in the Force that the new Sith Master experienced as a moment where the dark side would control him as much as he would control it. Then a tremor took hold of Coruscant itself, as if the planet recognized what had just occurred in that penthouse. Sprung from this act, the dark side released itself in a powerful wave across the planet, and at the center of the quake stood Sidious alone with the body of his former master. A rush of voices from near and far, and from present and ages past filled his thoughts, and those voices proclaimed his reign and cheered the start of a new order that would reshape the galaxy. Following the tradition of the Sith Order, the apprentice had completed his dark side training by ending his master through the path Darth Bane had set up 1,000 years before. Each generation of Sith proved its worth by beating and destroying the previous one in an endless cycle of replacement. Around the same time as his election to Supreme Chancellor, Sidious betrayed and took the life of Plagueis and claimed the role of Sith Master for himself. Political and Sith changes aligned perfectly as one identity ended and another began. The Empire existed in form before it existed in name because Sidious had taken over the financial empire of Plagueis through Damask Holdings, and all the setup of imperial power was already in place, while the announcement would come later. Remarkably, this mirrored what happened to the Master of Plagueis years before. The Legends novel shows that when Darth Plagueis took the life of Darth Tenebrous, the Force called out to him in a similarly uncertain way that the moment had come and he should claim his stake to the dark side. Tenebrous had been a Bith Sith Lord who focused on building things, including starships, weapons, and plans that stretched across decades. He had trained Plagueis in the ways of the dark side while doing his own secret experiments in midichlorian control. When Plagueis struck him down in a collapsed mineshaft, Tenebrous believed his mind would survive through his research. But he was wrong, and his apprentice took everything he had built. The same call that raised Plagueis now raised Sidious as the dark side spoke to one generation of the Sith and then spoke the same words to the next. But the novel makes an important point about choice that defines the Sith path. The Force only advised because it neither controlled actions nor guided hands, and that was the doing of Sidious alone, because the dark side whispered opportunity when the apprentice chose to seize it. The responsibility belonged to Sidious, and not to some mystical command. His final words to the dying Plagueis made his plans clear beyond any doubt or question. He promised that he would be proclaimed Emperor and that the Sith would have their revenge, and he would rule the galaxy. This was not pride or empty boasting, but prophecy and a statement of absolute certainty about events already set in motion through decades of careful planning. Sixth, he took everything his master had built and immediately set the Grand Plan into motion. With Plagueis gone, Sidious did not just gain the title of Master, but acquired major assets, as canon sources confirm. He took over 11-4D, the late Sith Lord's many-limbed assistant droid, along with the studies of Plagueis, including deep research into the biological foundations of life and midichlorian control. These studies contained decades of experiments and observations that Plagueis had gathered in his quest to beat mortality. Sidious would later use this research in his own experiments, including the creation of clone bodies on Exegol, and he took control of Damask Holdings and its vast financial network. Every asset Plagueis had built over decades now belonged to Sidious alone, and the secret replacement was already in place and had been for years without the Moon ever suspecting the depth of the betrayal. Legends lore establishes that Sidious had trained Darth Maul without the full knowledge or approval of Plagueis, which was a direct breaking of the understanding between Master and Apprentice. The rule of two meant exactly two Sith Lords, and by training Maul in secret, Sidious had created a third while breaking the very tradition that Plagueis sought to escape. Sidious had planned his betrayal from the beginning, because Maul would do what the risk of discovery might not allow Sidious to do himself, and the apprentice had always planned to beat and replace his master. With cold precision, Sidious then outlined his plans to the dying Plagueis. He had Maul perform tasks while he executed the rest of the Grand Plan that included growing an army in secret, starting rebellion across the galaxy, making up intergalactic war between fake factions, and surrounding the Jedi while catching them unaware. The methods he described would later become the Clone Wars, Order 66, and the Jedi would occupy the same position of trust and blindness that Plagueis had occupied. As Chancellor of the Republic and Dark Lord of the Sith, Palpatine would start the terrible Clone Wars 10 years after the Naboo crisis. Legend sources reveal that he himself headed both the Galactic Republic and, secretly, the Confederacy of Independent Systems. Victory and defeat were equally meaningless when one person controlled all the pieces, and in the wake of the Naboo crisis, the Galactic Senate voted to elect Palpatine as Supreme Chancellor because the crisis had been created by the Sith specifically to push him into the highest political office in the Republic. Chancellor Valorum had been ruined through the control of trade disputes and government failures that the Sith had planned behind the scenes. Now the office would have an unseen second occupant in the Dark Lord of the Sith, and the Republic had elected its future destroyer without ever knowing the true nature of the man they had chosen. The pattern would repeat throughout the reign of Sidious, as apprentices became tools to be used and replaced when no longer useful, and the only difference was that Plagueis learned it first and learned it last. When a tool broke or became unnecessary, another took its place without pause, and Sidious showed this lesson painfully to Count Dooku by ordering his end at the hands of Anakin Skywalker. Later, he made sure Darth Vader understood the same system. Apprentices were never equals, never fully trusted, and always tools to be shaped, tested, and replaced. From Plagueis, Sidious learned that closeness invited betrayal, so he kept Vader isolated, uncertain, and hungry for approval, offering praise rarely and punishment frequently. Knowledge and power were held back on purpose, secrets kept to ensure he remained needed, and fear was his constant tool for control. Every apprentice learned that their role was never a partnership, but usefulness, and their ambitions were always less important than his plans. This lesson shaped decades of the rule of Sidious, ensuring that no one ever felt safe enough to challenge him, and that his apprentices remained nothing more than tools in his endless pursuit of power. The central irony of the demise of Plagueis is stated directly in canon sources that describe what made it a tragedy. He could not save himself from his end despite being able to save others because he had gained power over life and could influence the midichlorians to create life and prevent others from passing. Yet when his own moment came, all that knowledge meant nothing, and the tale ended by saying that Plagueis became so powerful that the only thing he was afraid of was losing his power, which he did. The fear became prophecy. In truth, the Empire was born on that night, even though the galaxy would not learn of it for over a decade. With Plagueis gone, Sidious was now the sole Dark Lord of the Sith, and legend sources confirm that no rival, partner, or limit remained. There was clarity now, with one Sith, one vision, and one path forward toward galactic control. The body of Plagueis was never recovered by the authorities, and no public record of his end was ever filed. Ego Damask simply vanished from galactic affairs, and his business partners assumed he had retired or moved away. The banking clan continued to operate under new leadership, never suspecting that its founder had been ended by his own apprentice. Sidious had erased his master from existence as completely as if Plagueis had never lived at all. The tremor in the Force that shook Coruscant marked something the galaxy could not yet understand, and the voices from ages past proclaimed his reign and cheered the start of a new order because the Sith had worked in shadow for 1,000 years. By morning, the senator from Naboo would address the Republic as its new chancellor, but the true crowning had already happened alone in a penthouse apartment over the body of the last obstacle to absolute power. These 6 actions reveal Palpatine at his most calculating. The next videos explain how Darth Plagueis indirectly brought his own end to himself, and what Palpatine did with all that power to become hated by every ancient Sith.